So English looks like this, but we could have ended up with this. Over the years, English has had more than the 26 letters that make up our current alphabet. This video is about 9 of those letters that we've lost along the way. From the thrifty and handy to the kind of confusing. For example, find out why that is not pronounced ye. I reckon some of these might be due a comeback. Let me know in the comments which ones you think are worth resurrecting. First up, Thorn. Now this is a really old one. It's an old runic letter that made its way into English and stayed there for centuries. It entered English from the Anglo-Saxon runic alphabet known as the Futhorc. It got its name from the names of the first 6 letters in the alphabet. Like alphabet comes from alpha and beta, the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet. Where our alphabet song sounds like this. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I... The Anglo-Saxon alphabet song sounded like this.
Fails ur Thorn os rad ken Wynn nu.
Thorn was really useful because it served the purpose that 2 letters serve now, T and H. It made the th sound. What led to Thorn's demise was the fact that over the centuries it started to look an awful lot like a Y. So much so that once the printing press had been invented, European printers would actually just use a Y instead of Thorn. But this wasn't really sustainable because y and th don't sound anything like each other. So eventually Thorn was just replaced by the Latinized th spelling of the sound. But Thorn didn't disappear quietly into oblivion. It left behind a trail of confusion. It's the reason why in tourist traps all over England you'll see signs that apparently say ye olde on them. Except that's not a Y, it's a Thorn. That's not ye, it's the. Letter number 2, eth. Now Thorn wasn't the only way of writing the th sound in Old English. There was this other fun-looking letter called eth, or at least we call it eth. Actually, in Old English, it was known as that, and it could be used as shorthand for the word that, which meant that, but it's also one of several ways of writing the in Old English. Confused? Watch my video about the genders in Old English. Anyway, in Old English, eth and thorn were used interchangeably for th, sometimes even by the same scholar. However, beyond English, those 2 letters have subtle differences. Thorn represents the th sound, such as you would find in the word thorn, or thanks, or 3, whereas eth represents the sound that you would hear in eth, or this, that, and the other. Both thorn and eth also still exist in Icelandic. You might have seen eth in the name of Icelandic Eurovision Song Contest entrant Daði Freyr. Of course, his name isn't Daddy though, it's Daði. The use of eth in English ended before the use of even thorn, but ultimately both of them were doomed and replaced by th. Next up, Wynn. This is another letter that made it into Old English from the Futhorc, the Anglo-Saxon runic alphabet. It makes the sound that today a W makes in words like words. It was useful to writers of Old English because that were sound was common, but the Latin alphabet had no way of writing it with a single letter. They used to just put 2 V's or 2 U's next to each other because U and V were one and the same in the Latin alphabet back then. So, for example, in the word equus, they just used 2 U's. Despite its usefulness, Wynn didn't win out in the end. Maybe because it looked a bit too much like a P, and we ended up just using the double U method of Latin, or double V as it's known in French. Next, allow me to introduce you to Ash and Ethel. I'm giving you 2 for the price of 1 here because that's exactly what the inventors of each of these letters did. First up, ash, which is just an A and an E smooshed together. That's named after the rune that it replaced in making this a sound that you hear in the word ash. And it was a mainstay of Old English. You saw it everywhere. But it eventually died out when we just started using an a. It did have a bit of a comeback though when we started importing words from ancient Greek, for example, until really recently. In fact, probably still some places. You see it in words like ether or encyclopedia. Then there's Ethel, which, like the dear old lady that it conjures, goes way back. It's named after the Anglo-Saxon rune that it replaced called Edel, and it actually made an oi sound. However, it simply fell out of use to be replaced by oi and oy. But again, you might recognise it from some more recent usages, this time with Latin import words like subpoena occasionally and diarrhea. It's also still used in standard French in words like sœur and œuf, sister and egg. Now let's go from yolk to Yogh, another letter that we've lost along the way. It really came into its own during the Middle English period, so between the 1100s and the 1400s, where it could replace both a Y or a GH, so the Y sound and the H sound, both of which you hear in its name, Yogh. You can find it in Middle English transcripts in words as different as yet and night. You also got to bear in mind that GH has had a lot of different ways of being pronounced down the years. You should watch my video about the many different ways to say OUGH. Yogh disappeared for a multitude of reasons, not least because European typists preferred the Latin characters of Y and GH, but also because it started to become very difficult to tell the difference between a Yogh and a fancy Z. You know, when they draw that little tail underneath it. Incidentally, Yogh also existed in Scots, which isn't surprising given what it sounds like, and it's left its mark there too, because this reasonably common Scottish name isn't pronounced Menzies, it's pronounced Mingis, because that didn't used to be a Z, it was a Yogh. Next, have you ever looked at old documents and wondered, why have they replaced half of the S's with F's? Well, the fact is they haven't. What you're looking at there is something called a long S. It's an old alternative to the lowercase s that we're used to today. And it has disappeared because basically, who needs another way of writing a lowercase s? But it's stuck around for an awfully long time until as late as the 1800s. And it was used alongside the lowercase s that we're used to seeing today, sometimes in the same document, including on page 1 of the US Bill of Rights. But it's more than passing resemblance to an F. It does mean that down the years it rendered some rather elegantly written texts utterly hilarious. Because this is a family channel, I'm not going to show you what it did to Shakespeare's "Where the bee sucks, there suck I," but I think you get the picture. Next up, a quick mention for a letter that I would more than happily bring back. It's called eng, and it was used as a replacement for the ng at the end of words. And in fact, it's used in the International Phonetic Alphabet now for that sound. However, its use in English was all too brief. It was invented in the 1600s when the fashion really was for getting rid of letters, not adding them, and it didn't make the grade. So long, eng. Now, if you think eng is efficient, check out my last letter. It's the Tironian et. It was invented by a Roman called Tiro as shorthand for the Latin word et, which means and. It was also used in Old English as a replacement for the word and, a bit like an ampersand is. However, it was even more useful than an ampersand because it could be used to replace and and ond. Plus, you could embed it in words. For example, in the Old English word answer. It's a bit like today sticking it in the word London, or in the word Andy, or indeed in the word handy, because it's handy. I don't know why, but unfortunately it didn't win the Battle of the Ands. It lost out to ampersand, but it is still occasionally used in Irish. And that's all, folks. Do remember to let me know in the comments which of those letters you'll be campaigning to bring back. Thanks a lot for watching, and until next time, do remember to like and subscribe. Bye.